We are going. I believe, are rolling. There we go. Okay, and now I can do this. Welcome in, everybody, to Soccer Wise live post-game show for the U.S. Women's National Team. For the first time since 2012, Casey White, the U.S. goes undefeated, all three victories in the Olympic knockout stage. They finish on 9 points. They finish in first place in Group B. We already knew they advanced, but they finish in perfection. Do you feel like you've gone back in time? Does it feel like 2012?
It kind of does a little bit. I think it's nice to get that back. And look, at this point, it's all about execution. It's all about advancement. But it's nice to do it in a style of play that's exciting to watch, where you've really got a flow going, and they certainly have that.
It is fun to watch. It did not feel like the games we've watched over the last few years in today's match. We will talk about that. We will talk about everything that happened in the 2-1 win against Australia. I have the Canada game on in the background right now, so I will keep you updated as, like, by far the wildest story in the world of sports continues to progress. It started with Drone Gate. It has now moved to, like, this miracle that could possibly happen off the win against France. And I got to say, after all the cheating stuff, I'm Team Canada. Like, get this win, make this happen, and then make everyone even more confused and make life even more complicated for FIFA and the IOC and everyone else involved. Going forward, we'll talk about the other games. We have official confirmation. The U.S. will face off against Japan. That game coming up, I believe, on Saturday. So we will get the time as soon as we know it. I think still waiting for these results to come through to figure out what this schedule will look like. We've got some injury updates to do as well, of course, for this U.S. team. We've got to make some lineup changes for that next game because of some yellow card accumulation for some of these players. So a lot to talk about, a lot to dig in. Let's start big picture on this game. 2-1 victory over Australia after a 2-0 lead. Late goal for Australia to try and pull things back. What's your overall thoughts, reaction to this match?
Job done. And I think that's what they had to figure out how to do. Get that tie to win the group. Obviously, advancement is first, but winning the group is key as well. Not only for who you face, because Japan is going to be a tough matchup, and we'll get to that, but from a confidence perspective, they have faced a lot of different things. They faced Zambia, who tried to sit back. It wasn't as structured. Then playing against Germany, that was a lot more in the middle third. Figuring out how to dominate that. You all right over there? And now,
all over the place.
Yeah, you're good. Now Australia, who sat back in a 5-3-2, but much more structured, made it a little bit harder. So I think we faced a lot of different things in this group stage. So not only advancing, but facing things that you're going to see as you go throughout and being battle tested is something that's really important.
Yeah, I talked about my worries for this game because of what you just said, which was Australia was the one team in the group that could sit back and counter because it's in their identity, whereas Zambia was going to try to because they had no choice. And Germany, I thought, would maybe more than they ended up, and game states affected that. But this is who Australia is. Like, they are not a team that can open up and play, especially without Sam Kerr. They don't have a ton of metronome options to dominate possession. Mary Fowler is at her best in transition. Like, this is who they are. And so this was going to be the toughest game in that way, because you were facing a team who was in their DNA and matched up against what you struggle against. And I thought it was interesting that through the game, and we heard it coming out of the Costa Rica game, again, the example of Emma Hayes doesn't have the pent-up scar tissue of we can't break down low blocks. We can't find ways to score. She talked about it in that game. She talked about it coming out of the Mexico game. She's like, everyone just needs to relax. Like, it's not that big a deal. And I think that's what I felt in this game, which was they didn't panic early. And I would have liked to see some more risk at times. I was texting with some people, cut the ball back against the grain, dump it into an area, go press. But they didn't need to do that. And there is belief that the goal will come. And in this match, they didn't need to create it. Like, the U.S. would have won the group with a tie. So it was on Australia. And I thought it was a huge, mature moment for this team as a group to say, yeah, we're fine with that. And we have belief that eventually it will fall the way we need it to.
Yeah, I think you're right. And when you only need a tie, it does change the way you approach a game like this, where they come out in that 5-2-3 and it's a really low block that you don't have to win. So as a staff, you can keep the expectation to your players at bay. But we have that US spirit, like we've got to win every game, and we don't want to take that away from the group either. But you're right. Trinity Rodman did have a few moments where she cut inside, especially in that first half, and looked really dangerous. But a lot of times when you're playing against a low block, set pieces become very important, or second chances and shots from distance. And that's how we got 2 of our goals, off a corner kick and off a shot from distance, because then they have to come out. That first goal especially, very important, because it makes Australia have to come out and open up some more spaces.
And the first goal, if you go back and watch all the way through the segment of play, it is the first segment of time. It's 2-3 minute spell where Trinity Rodman comes off the right side and starts to float and find the game. Swanson plays every position. Sophia Smith reads that. She plays every position. You see in a game like this, Haran making runs, finding herself in different areas. Rodman is at her best down the right wing. She wants to get in those 1v1 spots. She either wants to come inside and shoot or go outside and create. And that's fine because she's a specialist and she's world class at what she does. It wasn't going to come in this game. And I thought it was really good recognition from her to finally come off that wing. She was an option centrally a couple times. And then the corner kick is created from her shot from the left-hand wing, where all of a sudden she pops up in a different area. Dunn can connect with her. She forces Mackenzie Arnold into the save, and then she scores off the corner kick. It is the things you need to do. And I thought, again, what was impressive was the progression of it. You don't start at plan 19 and emergency and freak out. You slowly get there as the game develops, and you know that you're threatening enough, which is when Rodman goes and floats, she's going to be one of the best threats on a ball on the back post, or she can be dangerous 1v1. And that's what you saw in this game. That's what you saw in the moment. After the goal, VAR insanity over the course of that time. I still don't really understand what happened.
That's putting it lightly.
Is it that VAR wasn't working and then started working?
That's what I think happened. Obviously, we never really got confirmation of that. And you could see Coach Tony Gustafson really upset. You could see the fist pump from Emma Hayes when the center official finally said it was a goal. Then it goes back. I was a little bit nervous in that moment because he had already said goal from the sideline, then went back. But in those bigger moments, you got to figure it out. You've got to get it right. And I do believe the officials got it right. I'm saying that from I think, a very unbiased perspective, really trying to assess Sam Coffey's movement, why line of sight was still there for Arnold as a goalkeeper, and why it actually didn't impede the ability to stop that goal.
And I didn't think it impeded the defender either. If you're talking about passive offside there and saying like defender plays the play, Coffey's further away from the ball and is not a player the defender's stepping a mark. So I agree with you. I thought it was a good goal, which is why it was so odd to then see this like drawn out process. And then Gustafson gets a yellow card, which if I'm him, I'm asking for that one back. Like, I did nothing wrong at that point. I will say it was Emma Hayes' peak where she gets brought over for the conversation. She's like not really paying attention. She's like, just let me know when it's a goal, and then it is. And right in Gustafson's face, she just quick fist bumps and walks back to the sideline. It was peak, and it is, as I said, like who she is. She is very unbothered, and in the good and the bad, she sits in the middle, and it seems like a lot of what this team needs.
We talked about it in a previous episode, right? Was she's controlled but passionate, and she balances that extremely well. But what I wanted to kind of add about the corner kick that I thought was so essential, Sam Coffey does exactly what she's supposed to do. When there's no post players, you are starting in an offside position. So when that ball floats to the back post, she moves opposite. That's what keeps her out of the line of sight on the original header. Then when Sophia Smith goes to head, she moves opposite again because she knows Sophia Smith's going to want to head it back post. So she's constantly moving. That is just brilliant from her, because otherwise you would be in an offside position. So I just love that from her, and just the cerebral way that she plays in certain moments.
And I thought set pieces were more dangerous throughout this game. It's been a conversation point just because they have not been as dangerous as you'd expect with the options they have, both when it comes to service and it comes to options in the box. And that was a big moment there where Smith goes up, wins it on the far post, but you have everyone crash near post. So you get the 1v1 opportunity, which I think that's one of my issues has been with what I watch with the US is they have everyone spread out. And so you don't have overloads anywhere to force the defense to commit. And I have said it a million times, Haran should be near post every time, whether it's as a decoy or a flick on. And that's what you saw in this one, and it was a really good moment for the U.S.
It really was. It was straight off the training ground, organized perfectly, headed down perfectly. That gives an opportunity.
Right.
If she's just going for glory on that, and it's like a one opportunity, right? Because it's either in or it's flying over. So it's textbook, down into it. You give yourself a couple chances. But yeah, I think you're right. All of that was organized really well and very dangerous.
Do we want to talk Sam Coffey for a minute here? Because there's a whole
do
lot
it.
of conversation for her.
Let's do it.
So Coffey gets the start. She is the starting D-mid on this team. She is kind of the only D-mid on this team. The U.S. had already qualified before this game. She was sitting on a yellow card, already picked up in the first two. 2 yellow cards in the group stage is suspension for the quarterfinals. She picks up a yellow card in the 3rd minute of this game. So she will be suspended for the next game. What do you make of the decision to start her, the way it played out? And then we'll talk about what you do next.
Well, I think it's easy to look at it after the fact, right? Which is what we're doing, and not ideal because we definitely want her in that next game. But it looked like Emma Hayes was going with this is our unit, and we've got to put Sonnet in there with Davidson being out, right? And that fluidity is really important. And we kind of talked about that. We expected them to start that way. So I'm not surprised by the start. But we got to remember, too, like, Coffey's still pretty young overall in her national team career. And so there's moments where she's going to learn. And this is unfortunately one of those moments that, especially that early on, to get the yellow is tough. But I don't necessarily fault the starting her. I think that you can't really predict that. And they want to win the group. So I think it's very tough, like, balancing those decisions.
Yeah, it is something I hadn't really thought about until the games was till 3 minutes into the game, where for a club manager, you don't have these short tournaments this way, right? Like you'll have stuff like that where do I take a player off on a yellow card throughout the game to not get a red, or maybe a Champions League type playoff setup where it's like from one game to the other. But over the course of a regular season, you're not really thinking about yellow card accumulation that often. It is not a huge thing, but I think it is one of the things to remind ourselves of like, this is slightly new for Emma Hayes. And even in our conversations that Julie Foudy was talking about over the broadcast of, well, we're focused on this one game, we're not talking about other opponents, all of that stuff's great, but your job is to be doing a little bit of that away from the players. And this might be a learning experience for her as well if you go into the next game and you lose because you don't have a true defensive midfielder in there and all of that and what happens. I went back and watched the yellow card a couple times. It's a soft yellow card. She, Gorey, the defensive midfielder for Australia, receives the ball with her back to goal in midfield in the 3rd minute. Coffey comes from behind, clips her ankles, trying to go for the ball, doesn't. It is not overly aggressive. It's obviously not killing a play going forward. It is a super standard soccer play. It was odd that it was given a yellow card, especially when you go watch the rest of the game and you see some of the more physical fouls and contact that wasn't. I'm not going to do like a 15-minute referee thing here over a yellow card in the first 3 minutes. It's fine. But I think that goes into just a little bit context with the conversation on Coffey of like, she is new to the national team. She is new to this level. She is still a younger player, but she also didn't really do anything ridiculous in the moment to get herself there. So I think all of that's a little bit tough. She then played out the 90, which we were texting about. I think it makes sense in short turnarounds of like, you got to get 90 minutes out of her at that point to save some other legs. But Corbin Albert, who I think we expect to replace her in the next game, comes on for the final 30. Do you think that's just like for like change going forward?
Well, I think that's the most obvious change unless Davidson is healthy. Another option is Sonnet into that midfield. It just depends really on what you're expecting out of Japan and what you want in that center mid and that holding mid space. But I do think the most obvious change is Corbin Albert from a possession standpoint and getting her into the game. Once that yellow card happened, we were, like you said, we were texting. We knew that was going to happen. I think her getting the goal was big from a confidence perspective. Now, was the possession as fluid as probably all of us would have hoped in the second half with that midfield? Not necessarily, but you've got to also credit Australia with that. Like, we didn't need to push like crazy. We needed to be smart. We needed to try to control the game. And Australia was pushing. They put Kennedy up top. There's 4 across our back line. So it's a little different. But I think to get her a run in that space is really important.
It got very quickly into the no tactics zone, right? Australia's throwing center backs forward and whatever. So it's hard for a midfield to really operate in a space like that. I agree with you. I think the goal is just a huge sigh of relief. Historic goal is the first debut goal in a women's national team player's career in the Olympics.
Oh,
I guess
yeah.
that makes sense because you'd expect by the time you get to the Olympics, you're experienced, especially the
Right.
attackers. And so a midfielder and obviously a young player coming in under a new coach, a bit of a unique circumstance for the U.S., but a pretty cool moment there, and a big goal and a big play. Sonnet, as you mentioned, forced into the team because of Tierna Davidson's injury. She gets to start at left center back, plays the full 90 minutes. The other option would be to insert Emily Sams, who was brought onto the full roster from the alternate, the Orlando Pride center back, into the team there and move Sonnet into midfield. That would be your other option. Do you feel strong about that?
Yeah, I actually have a pretty strong opinion on that, and it's not about necessarily Emily Sams. It's that she hasn't gotten minutes in this Olympics. So to put her into that matchup without having any minutes, that would be a pretty tough call. They'd have to feel very strongly that Sonnet is the right option in that holding mid role to do that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but with her not being in the match day roster until today and not getting minutes today, which they could have done, if that was a potential option moving forward, I would say it's highly unlikely we do see that.
It is, I will say Emily Sonnet to me is a center back. I know she plays defensive midfield. I know she does
Agreed.
it at times for club and has done it for country, but I wouldn't feel strongly in that way because I don't think that's her natural position. I also think
Correct.
it's interesting now. Let's talk about Japan for a moment. Japan won 3-1 against Nigeria earlier today. That seals their spot in the next round. So it's USA against Japan. It is the first Olympic matchup since the 2012 gold medal game. So there's great history behind this matchup. They obviously faced off in She Believes Cup back in April in Atlanta. Japan scored in the first minute. Jaden Shaw then the stunner to equalize, and then Lindsey Horan scored the penalty. That was before Emma Hayes was actually coaching the team, although it was not that long ago. When I look at this matchup, Japan, behind maybe only Spain, are one of the teams that has that tactical identity. They will play through everything. They will try and play short. It feels like Corbin Albert fits that game pretty well. And if you're going to have a game where you don't have one person covering space and destroying and all of that, this is kind of the game to do it because it will probably be a cleaner played game than what you saw today.
Absolutely. It'll definitely be a possession-oriented type game. Corbin Albert fits that. We both defend the same way in a 4-4-2. We attack differently, however, so it's going to be testing their 4-4-2 defensively, which we know is super organized, very efficient. But they attack out of a 4-2-4 and really push the 4 up on the back line. So if we don't defend in that counterattack, and get back, that could cause us issues. So I think the more we have the ball and have possession, it's going to allow us to dictate the game more. Corbin Albert can come in and do that. And I think that will naturally just be a better fit overall in that matchup.
Do you think the halftime sub from Crystal Dunn to Jenna Neiswanger had any ideas about what fits the Japan matchup better?
Perhaps. I think there could be a few things at play. For Jenna Neiswanger coming in, I thought Crystal Dunn looked a little bit off technically in this first half, and that could be just being a little bit tired, getting her a rest, whatever it may be. She didn't have a bad game by any means, but just little things here and there. So it made sense to get Jenna Neiswanger more minutes because just from a rest perspective, they have to manage that throughout this entire tournament. But also, it can keep Jenna Neiswanger confident, keep her going. Remember, she didn't get minutes in the back against Zambia. She came in and went in that wing position. So you just never know. They might be thinking it's a tactical move that they want to see, or it could just be player management at the end of the day.
I'm starting to throw everything at the wall. One of
Go
the other
for it.
conversations could be you could play Crystal Dunn centrally and you could drop her in and not really have a true D mid and just have talent out there and have players that have played in those areas of the field before, if not specifically in that spot. We saw Croy Bethune make her debut in this one as well. She's the other number 10 option, but it feels like Rose Lavelle's progressing pretty well. Wasn't her best performance. I would say across the board, one of the odd things about this game was it's a low block. That's what you're talking about. That's what you're stressed about. Then when Australia opened up, I thought the U.S. was actually not very clean in transition. They weren't sure. It felt like what they wanted to do. And you saw Lavelle, Swanson, as well as Smith make a couple of mistakes. I think a lot of them were mental of in between two decisions and couldn't decide what to do. And like those were the moments where I get up off the couch saying just go, go, go. And it felt like the team kind of stumbled in those moments, and yet they still went up 2-0.
Well, we talk about thirds of the field and how you can defend different, attack different. Moments of the game can change too, and that can really throw off the way the other team is attacking and feels comfortable. I didn't think this was our most technically clean game, but a low block highlights that, and I do think there was a little bit of that hangover going into when Australia did come out. We weren't as sharp, and that's going to happen throughout a tournament. So you got to figure out, well, how do you win when that happens? And I think they showed that they could do that today. But you're right, I don't expect that to stay that way because they have been so sharp. But doesn't it bode well when we're saying, okay, it wasn't quite as sharp technically, and they're getting the win, right? Yep. That's a good place to be, but something they can definitely address.
Yeah, it feels like something that is definitely different than the way it was over the last few years, especially over the last 18 months or so. So a big performance over the course of this game. Albert gets that second goal off the Australian turnover, and then Australia gets the late goal, throwing numbers forward. They tried for a second, weren't really super dangerous in those moments. It leaves Australia in a very odd place. They are currently behind Brazil. So Brazil have qualified as one of the two best third place teams. We don't know what will happen with Australia as Canada is on the field right now trying to knock them out. And I'll keep you updated as that one goes along. So first time for 9 points in the group. I think overall now, talk me through what happens inside this squad, how they leave the group stage and go into this matchup with Japan mentally, physically, like what do the next few days look like?
Well, from a recovery perspective, okay, who's available? How long are they available? What are the minute restrictions? Are there any? So does Jaden Shaw come back in? Did they not put her in the squad today because she's truly not ready, or are they resting her to come in the next game? I think that's a big question mark. You obviously got to figure out what's going on with Davidson and go from there. Then you've got to think about your unit fluidity, like the players that are comfortable with each other, all those pieces. So I think that's really what the staff is up against these next few days and what they have to sort through and figure out. Then after figuring that out, now it's, okay, how do we keep our identity going, but what's the best tactical matchup with Japan? Where do we want to expose them? What do we need to be aware of? And I think the biggest thing they need to be aware of, if today was any indication, was the efficiency with which they scored. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was 3 goals on 4 shots in the first half for Japan. So it wasn't like Nigeria wasn't playing well. You know, they had that foul at the end, and Japan put it away at the end of the first half on the free kick. But I think that's something you have to have in your mind, that they need to be really structured defensively, because Japan is very good when mistakes happen and they can put away that one opportunity. And they haven't faced that yet. And I think that's really important to note.
It feels clear to say the U.S. will be favorites, but when you look at this matchup and how it plays out, like, what's your expectation of what this game looks like?
Well, I do think that we would have the ball a decent amount of the time, but I just don't see Japan playing as deep as maybe we've seen Zambia or we saw Australia play today against the United States, because they're incredibly comfortable on the ball. Over their history, every time I've either played against them or watched them, I'm like, do they have 13 players on the field? It just looks like very easy to keep the ball for them. And so I think we have to expect we might have some more ebb and flow of like, okay, we're going to have to defend in the middle third well because they're keeping it. But I'd like to see the U.S. pick the moments to press. That's what the U.S. does well, but they have to do it with an understanding of where are the pocket areas, the pressure pockets where they want to win possession. I think if we can press in the right moments, we may be able to implement something into our game that we really haven't seen as much in these first 3 that could be effective for us.
And I will say, from when I watch Japan, one of the things that I find fun about them is they are this possession team, they have this idea, but when they choose to press, they press hard for 1, 2, 3 minutes in a row. They always know their trigger, and once that trigger goes, they attack. You'd have to think Fox and Dunn's possession is going to be one of those triggers. Sonnet maybe as well when she steps forward. She was not as willing today to step into the channel in progressed possession the way Davidson has been. And so you have to think for Japan, if they can lure her in, that's where they're going to try and attack.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was noticing that today that there wasn't that dribble penetration to draw out the three of Australia that were at the highest point defending. So there's a couple ways that can work. It could continue that way if Sonnet's in, and there could be a false outside back. Maybe Lindsey Horan pops out into that wide space, because you've got to remember Japan plays in a 4-4-2, so they'll just have two forwards.
Right.
So you can get Lindsey Horan maybe on the ball, or even Corbin Albert popping out on one of the sides on the ball, so they're playmaking, and that gets our outside backs a little bit higher. So if you're not going to reinvent the wheel of personnel and what they're comfortable with, but tactically, Emma Hayes, I'm sure, will have some rotations that will get our more technical players on the ball that can build out.
And we're going to be talking about set pieces again, because Japan were one of the best teams at the World Cup. They went out because they couldn't defend set pieces. We've seen that over the last few months as well with this Japanese team. And for the U.S., like we talked about, it should be an advantage. It was today. It can be more often. And it's going to be key for this matchup and for this game. We'll have our fingers crossed that Davidson will be available. We didn't get any news either way.
Right.
She didn't train yesterday. She was not available today. Same with Jaden Shaw. There's not a lot more coming out of the camp as you go through games. I do believe the U.S. heads to Paris now, right? They've been playing in Marseille.
So, yes.
This quarterfinal game's in Paris. I think you then leave for the semifinals to go back to the final, if that is where you make it. But it's really cool to get to go be in the host city. Paris has been awesome. The fans have been incredible. Like, you have to think the stadium's going to be packed. It's going to be a really good experience. It's going to be a really good show for this one. And the U.S. has put on a show so far. They've been fun to watch. Now you come out of it, it's 9 goals in 3 games for this team, a team that struggled to score at the World Cup just a year ago. That is a huge turnaround. It's a big difference. We talked about how condensed and how dangerous the Olympics are. Like, you don't get time against the Vietnam or Thailand to find your feet, and the U.S. hit the ground running, and they've done really, really well going forward. It sounds like Sophia Smith also not impressed with the nicknames for the front three. We complained about it last time. Trying is still better.
Help us, Sophia. Yeah. Let us know what you want to be called.
I think she's kind of waiting on the fans to, like, someone to step up and perform. And I'm just saying, all of us are dropping the ball at the same time.
We are.
In the biggest moment every 4 years on the Olympics. So we got to work on that one and continue going forward. Germany knocked off Zambia in the other Group B game. So Germany took second place in the group on their 2 wins. Schuler scored in the 10th. Germany made it 2-0 in the 48th. Banda then scored to pull it back to 2-1, but then Germany stretched the lead out later on. So they got that victory. Let's talk about Japan's group. Japan, the 3-1 win against Nigeria to finish second behind Spain. Spain got a 2-0 win over Brazil, in which Marta picked up a red card in stoppage time of the first half. It was sort of one of those crazy moments. The ball pops up. She puts her foot up to go get it, but it is too high. Olga steps in to try and head it, and Marta makes contact with the attacking player's head. It is dangerously high boot. She is red carded. It's a straight red card. So my assumption is it's a 2-game suspension off of this. So she could come back if they made it all the way to a medal game. But short of that, you could see the emotion on her face. You could feel the emotion on the Brazil team. You kind of have been sitting on this for a while of every time Marta does something, it feels like it might be the last time. And then everyone has that recognition. This is probably her last Olympic match, and it was a very unfortunate way for a legend to go out.
Yeah, I mean, it was a no-doubter red card, and that's, at least that's the case, and it wasn't necessarily something that can really be debated with just, like, how high and dangerous it was. But I don't think you can feel, if you didn't feel for her in that moment and see the emotion, whether, you're the biggest Marta fan or you're not. Like, she has been an absolute legend in the women's game, still is. And to see her emotion in that moment, like, I felt so incredibly bad for her because she was competitive. I mean, in another game, someone may not have been there, and she was just clearing the ball out. So just the timing of it, where it was out on the field, it was unnecessary. I mean, I'm sure she's like, I shouldn't have gone in on that, but you hate to see that from her, and it's obviously a big blow for Brazil now with them being even more so being in a chance to, or actually they are advancing, being in a spot to advance forward.
And so Marta won't be available for that game. There's still a ton of talent in this Brazil team. Like, they are not a team to be taken lightly. I think they've defended really cleanly over the course of these 3 games. And that's what's been frustrating with their moments of madness. So game 1, you win 1-0. Second game, you give up the penalty in the 92nd minute. I can't remember if it was Tarsian or not, but it's a hand out while sliding down, and that's the handball. It wasn't even to block a chance or block a goal. Like, it's kind of a mental moment, and then they fall apart off the turnover 3 minutes later.
Right.
And then this game with the red card, where I think some of the Brazil issues in the past of like, oh, they're dangerous, they're fluid, but they're not going to be able to stay compact defensively. Those haven't been the issues, and yet they've still shot themselves in the foot quite often. But now they go into the knockouts with a clean slate, and I don't think anyone's going to want to play them in the next round because they are a dangerous team. They are a talented team. So my understanding is they play the winner of Group A. New Zealand just scored to equalize against France. So right now it's still up in the air whether it would be Colombia or France. Both those games tied right now. So both teams sitting on 4 points going forward. Let me ask you big picture. Favorites to win this whole thing now that we start to see what's happening in the knockout rounds. Has your mind changed about anyone? Is there anyone that you think is the biggest threat?
Not necessarily my mind has changed. I'm always going to say the United States. I mean, that's just not going to change for me, especially with the way they're playing right now. Not just with my heart, but with my head and what I'm seeing. They're in great form. Obviously, Spain is playing well, and they've had some very professional approaches, and they're the defending World Cup champion. So it doesn't take a genius to name Spain. I think what's really interesting is anyone can play spoiler. I don't think it's so much of like who are the obvious favorites to win. But you look at, a Colombia, when they get going, like they are dangerous. They make you uncomfortable. Japan, very methodical in the way they play, but efficient. So if on any given day, I do think there's a couple of spoiler teams in this. And you mentioned Brazil. I think Brazil's up against it. I really do. But I also think Marta will galvanize them and say, okay, like this is what we need to do. Let's go. She's passionate. They're going to be wanting to play to get her back in. So get her another chance. So we can't say that sport is devoid of emotion just because I love talking tactics, but it's passion, it's emotion, it's anyone can win, especially in this game that we love on any given day. So I think that's going to be really fun to watch play out.
Yeah, it's the fusion of all those things to be able to put the performance on the field at the right time. I mean, it's the Olympics. We're watching every other sport as well. It is so emotional, and it is a fragile moment. Like, you are away from home. You're in this camp. You're in a group. We talked about going to Paris. Now I think they go into the Olympic Village. So now you start to meet everyone else. Everything else is going on. Like, there is a lot happening off the field for these players on top of all of else we talked about. Reminder, Mayra Ramirez picked up the red card in the first game. Her suspension was extended a game. That is happening now. So I believe she would be available into the knockout rounds for Colombia, which would be a huge addition for them.
Absolutely.
As you mentioned. It feels like if France does the rest of the business today and is able to win their group, France, Brazil, and Spain would end up on the same side of the bracket with either Australia and Canada. And the U.S.'s side of the bracket would be Japan, Germany, and Colombia. That's how that would lay out if France were to win today. That feels like the side of the bracket you want to be on, especially with Oberdorf's injury, especially with the way Germany has played. They played Pop in central midfield again today against Zambia. It was better for them because Zambia was a different matchup, but she still didn't look super dangerous from what I watched, and you still can't really play through her. And so I think when you look back at past Olympics and you say meeting a Sweden early on was really, really tough, I don't know that this Germany team is that same style of opponent. I think Japan might be the best team on that side of the bracket. So you get them in the quarterfinals, which is tough. But if you get past that, you're getting as good a semifinal as you're going to get in an Olympics because it's just not going to be easy at any point going forward. So I think this is a setup really well for the U.S. Like you said, I think they've played really well. I am still underwhelmed by France, and I find it extremely frustrating. And like Julia Foudy talked today on the broadcast about Australia 2023, how it was their 99er moment. That's what it should have been for France in 2019. Right. Then they get a second shot at it, and you lose to a Canada team in the 12th minute of stoppage time that doesn't have a coach, that doesn't know their future, that doesn't know how many points they're sitting on. Like, that's frustrating stuff for a team filled with players who win Champions League and win French leagues and Premier Leagues and all these things, or WSL leagues, all these things over and over again. I think that's been really frustrating to watch, but I'm going to keep believing they're going to turn it on. So I'll be tricked until the end with this France team.
Oh, I agree with you. I do think it's been underwhelming to watch France, but I get this like, okay, well, there's been times that as the United States, we haven't done really well in group stage and we kind of
Right.
like either eked out or got out and then it like galvanized us, you know? So I get nervous about that. I'm like, okay, but these good teams, Champions League players, that level, give them the opportunity to get into the knockout rounds. It's like everything starts over. And then you really are one at a time. And you're not thinking about goal differential. You're not thinking about, you're going, go out and win a game. And I think that France, you know, getting to that stage, that allows them to start over, which could be very dangerous. But it's just not so easy to all of a sudden get in form either. So I'm not sure how that's really going to play out overall.
It is going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be fun to watch. There has not been a match day in this Olympic setup that hasn't been wild from start to finish. Whether it's a march of red card to open things up or a 6-5 game, back and forth stuff, all of this Canada drama and everything else as well. We talked about this slightly last time, and you gave me a POV, but now I'm seeing comments come out that everyone cheats. What do you make of that when someone says, like, what Canada did was wrong, but everyone's doing something like this?
Well, I told you, like, I'm a very, like, black and white person. I don't like to live in the gray, especially in these kind of situations. Like, I think that's a harsh statement to come out and say. Like, it's very easy to just throw that out there, but, like, what examples are there? Like, what else has happened? And I think if you're going to say that about other countries or other programs, like, there needs to be something behind it. And so I don't necessarily prescribe to that. It's, okay, well, what has been seen? Now, I'm not saying it's not happening. I don't know if it's happening with other places, but it's just a harsh thing, I think, to say, and it doesn't make it right. Even if all that's true,
Right.
like, it doesn't make it right. So to me, that's irrelevant. It shouldn't be happening. But what I will say is, what I think for Canada has been really cool. I don't know if you saw the picture that's been circulating on social media of Vanessa Gilles, like, just her passion when they won the last game, and just you can see the emotion in her of just going, let's get after it as players. I think they've done like a pretty phenomenal job of like harnessing what's going on and directing it onto the field. That's all they can do, but that doesn't mean it's easy. And they're showing that caliber, and we'll see what happens today. Obviously, we're right in the thick of it. But I can only imagine what they're going through. And for them to be able to put themselves in a position on the last day to advance is pretty incredible.
Yeah, to have won the 2 games, like, it's already, I think, more than you'd expect, and they've already proven who they are and what they are. And, like, unfortunately, they're a little bit used to this, right? They've been fighting their own federation for 5 to 25 years, pick whatever number you want. Correct. Over the course of time. And now the federation's the one who's coming in as the good guys against the coaching, and like, it's all chaos. And so I think you've seen this group solidify, which I don't know that everyone would be sure of now post Sinclair and post some of these other huge name players where you don't have the same guidance maybe in veterans, but it seems like the group has coalesced, and that's really promising going forward, because there are a lot of pieces in this team, the Flemings, the Heidemas, who are going to be here for a long time. And I think they're going to be the ones who lead you going forward. I agree with you on the, like, that doesn't make it right. I think it gives a little credence to some people being like, well, does the gold medal count? How do you affect the Copa America? These rules wouldn't exist if people weren't doing these things and people weren't trying to do these things. I think that has to be put out there at some point of, like, you don't have to tell people they can't spy if they're not trying to spy. It is something that happens. It is a conversation we have. We make the jokes about Bielsa, but his point was he wasn't the only one who does that as well. I think Tyler Adams was quoted as saying, like, yeah, there's always a staff member in a stadium the day before the game who says they work on maintenance and then is a coaching staff person, right? Like, there are pieces around all of this. It's the extent to which you do it, and I think that's part of what's come out that feels a little offensive with this is you see old staff members saying, like, they were morally opposed and told to do it and then how to deal with them and all that type of stuff. So I think when you look at it, and part of the appeal with the 6 points is the punishment to staff members feels fair. The punishment to the players feels a little harsh because they don't control the setup and they don't control what happens. And I do think the reaction to past success is also harsh. I don't think you can say they won a gold medal because someone flew a drone over practice 1 or 2 times. Correct. I don't think you can say the men qualified for a World Cup or were able to get to the Copa America semifinal because of that as well. But we're all trying to find, unfortunately, the gray area in between, because there is no black and white with this one. And Canada has made sure of it. It has been wild. The whole story's been wild, but I think it's been a really fun Olympics so far. I am looking forward to the knockout rounds. And we're going to keep doing our show and keep talking about all of this as we go forward. So we know the U.S. will play Japan. We don't know any of the other matchups yet. So we know Brazil are through, Spain, Germany as well. We're waiting to see if it's with France, Colombia, Canada, or Australia to go along with them. And we will break it all down for you once those games come to a close. We have a happy hour coming up in like an hour and a half for your Patreon subscribers. So if you're watching and listening and you're not a Patreon subscriber, be one, because you can jump into the Discord, talk the games with us, look at our depth charts, all the other things. Casey, any final thoughts from you about anything Olympic?
I'm just pumped. I am so excited to get to the knockout rounds. I mean, I love group. I think it's fun. But this is what it's about. So I think just getting into those games is going to be really exciting for all of us to watch. So now this is more Casey the fan and the ex-player that like feels like I'm running with them, but like I could never do that now. But I'm just excited to watch all these matchups coming.
Well, my team lost 7-0 last night, so you could probably do it with a lot of people, but maybe not this team as well. It is the knockout rounds. We are excited about it. It is fun. This is what we built for. It felt like everything the first 15 minutes of the opening game, and now it is knockout time, and now it's getting better. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching.